pictures himself being taken in a chariot to the goddess. Welcome then to lecture 2. My name is Dr. Adrian Heathcote. This is the second lecture of this unending series in metaphysics. And this lecture is going to be on, or the beginning of, lecture on, Poem of Being by Parmenides. Now, to try to understand Parmenides, we have to first of all realize that it's a poem that is split into several parts, 3 parts. The first part is called the proem, or the preamble. Now in this, and it has a rather dramatic, this is not the way that any modern philosopher would begin, but it is how Parmenides began his poem. It was an arresting beginning for anything, even in the Greek period, mesmerized the Greeks. Parmenides pictures himself, it's a vision, if you like. He pictures himself being taken in a chariot to the goddess. He's being preceded in this by maidens who precede the horses, the mares who lead the horses through the gates of night. The maidens are the maidens of the sun. He's led through the large gates of night into the presence of what is only known, what is only said to us as the goddess. We aren't told what the goddess's name is. Many have speculated that it is the goddess of night, the goddess Nyx, the goddess of night. Which would make some sense. But we don't know, ultimately. She's just called the goddess. Now the goddess takes Parmenides by the hand, by the right hand, and addresses him as a youth, so that we know that Parmenides at this point is not too old. And she says to him that it's good that he has come this way, and it's good, the implication is that it's good that he has come this way on a righteous journey, not, as it were, through bad circumstances. He hasn't come to the goddess through death. He's alive. And he's on a quest to understand. And the goddess promises him that she will allow him to understand. What she says to him in this is, I'll read you out and I'll put it on the screen for you. But come now, I will tell you, and you, when you have heard the story, will safely bring it away. I will tell you which are the only routes of inquiry that are for thinking. The one that is, sorry, let me say that again. The route that of to understand what is and what it is not possible for it not to be. We would say that as what it necessarily is. This is the path of persuasion, and it's the path of truth. Now, there is another path that she warns against, and it's a path that one can't take. This is the path of trying to understand what is not. That is not a right path. One can't pursue that. Why? Because one can't talk about what is not. if one could talk about it, it would have to be something the words would have to refer. The names would have to refer, so one would have to be talking about something. The implication is that one can't talk about nothing, so one can't talk about what is not. So that is not a method of inquiry that one can pursue which would lead to the truth. It necessarily involves you in a kind of error from the outset. So one can't take this route. It is not the goddess's route. It is not the route to truth. It is a route that is an illusion, or worse than that, a non-enterprise, a non-inquiry. So we have us warned against that, and we have us presented with the route to truth, which is to understand what is and what must be, what cannot be, cannot not be. That is the goddess's way, and she contrasts this with a second way, a way that one can pursue, and that is the path of mortals and their opinions about the world. You could say, though this sounds a bit disparaging, but you could say that it's a path of, not of truth and philosophy, but of the sciences, of gathering opinions and data about the world and trying to pursue that. And this is how mortals do pursue. It is not the goddess's way of understanding the world, but it is the mortal's way of understanding the world. It is a piecemeal enterprise. And it's not going to amount to the truth. It's going to amount to an assemblage of opinions about the world. Now, much of that this is described in the third part of Parmenides' poem. But Parmenides, well, this part of Parmenides' poem has not survived. It didn't survive, it seems, very well even in the Greek period. And so we don't know fully what that said. We only have fragments of it. The only solid fragments we have come from the first part. I suppose it must have been regarded as the valuable part, even in the Greek period. In that first major section, apart from the proem, the major section in which the goddess is describing the way of the gods, the way to truth, the way through reason to understand what the world is like. So what she says in this part is, "But come now, I will tell you, and when you have heard the story, bring it safely away, which are the only routes of inquiry that are for thinking." And she describes what I've said as the way of understanding what is and what must be. What we already have is already very important, but let's give a bit more detail to it. So the goddess says, talking about what is, how could what is being, how could it vanish? How could it perish? How could it come to be in the first place? How could it be born? And how could it perish? How could it die? The implication is that it couldn't. Neither of those things. It can't come into being and it can't go out of being. For if it comes to be, then it once was not. Nor, if it is, could it go out of existence? Could it come not to be? because then we've already said that what is not cannot be spoken of. So it would come from what is cannot be spoken of at all into being. And that would make no sense. If it were in being and if it would go out of being, then it would become something that one couldn't speak of. So what we already have is in some ways a sort of an idea of, well, being must then be eternal. It can't come from nothing. How could it? You can't speak of nothing, and it can't go into nothing. She says, for if it comes to be, it is not. It is or was not. Nor if it ever comes about to come to be. In this way, coming to be has been extinguished and destruction is not heard of. Same as what I just said. Now, here's another aspect. So it's eternal. Neither is it divisible, since it is all alike. Nor is it, so being cannot be many things, it has to be one, being has to be one thing. Nor is it in any way more in any one place, which would keep it from holding itself together, she says. Nor is it in any way less, but all is full of what is, being. Therefore, all is continuous, for what is being comes near to what is. This all sounds mysterious. How do we understand this? Well, this idea of there can't be any gaps in being, the gaps would then have to be non-being or nothing. And we've already said that can't be, one can't speak of that. So already in the very presuppositions of how we're supposed to understand this, we now have this idea that being has to have no spaces between it. There can't be any gaps between it. It has to be one solid mass, if you like. So therefore it can't be divisible, but then there would be gaps between the various parts. And there can't be anything more in one place than there is in another. Being has to be, as it were, evenly distributed. This is a little bit obscure, I think. I'm not sure what the argument is here, other than to say, well, being can't be more or less being. Being is only being. What would a less being be? It would be something which was less, and therefore was more nothing. That can't be, because of reasons we've already said. So nothing can arise from nothing, and it can't go into nothing. It can't change, and this is an important point. Being can't change, because then it would have to go from something that it was into something that it originally was not, to become, again, something which we can't speak of. We can't speak of what it's not. So being can't change. It has to be not just immortal, not just something which can't go out of existence, but it can't change within its existence either. Can't be added or subtracted from, since there can't be any, one could say there can't be any motion of being, because motion would imply a change from something that is to something that is not. Now that means that space can't be a non-being. Space can't be a gap between being. The gap between, say, the Earth and the Moon cannot be a nothing, because we've already said, or the goddess has already said, nothing can can't be spoken of. There is no existence of nothing. You can't say nothing exists. Nothing is not a thing to exist. Therefore, space can't be nothing. Therefore, space, if we observe there to be a gap between Earth and the moon, there has to be being between the Earth and the moon. And if we call that space, then space has to have being. It has to be something that exists. And in the same way, I suppose one could say that time also has to exist. And what one may be able to make of this, if one is making any sense of it, is to say, well, being can't change in itself. Therefore, being as a whole, all of being, can't evolve in time. Therefore, the goddess is looking at the world not as something which is evolving in a thing called time, but rather she's looking at the world and describing to Parmenides the idea of a world that is timeless. In other words, she's looking at the world as though it's a four-dimensional thing, not things on the three-dimensional world that we see, but standing back and seeing things, in the Latin phrase, sub specie aeternitate, from the viewpoint of eternity. That seems to be the goddess's point of view. So movement, as we understand it, as I'm doing right now, movement for the goddess's point of view has to be an illusion. If you were looking at it from her point of view, nothing would be changing. Only things would be static, if you like. So that is how the goddess sees the world. Okay. Next part soon.